Continuing on with the drums that I've been working on for this cover, I'm going to take you through how I make my samples. Because as much as I don't want to use samples for this cover, it needs it. Now, I'm not going to go through how we recorded all the samples and mic'd up the drum kit and all of that. All we did was, after the kit was mic'd up, got our levels, hit record, and just hit one hit at a time. I'll do more technical drum stuff like miking and gain staging and all that later, but we didn't have a lot of time to work with that day, which is also why I actually really need the samples for this session. Let's take a look at what we got here. So here we got everything up. So I already went through everything and made sure it's all in phase. Here I'm just going to go through what we got. So the first two hits are more for effect sampling than actual drum enhancement. These first two are just crashes and I believe a China, just for accent parts. When doing those, I like to do two cymbals at a time to really make sure everything's accented properly. All right, so here with the kicks, this is actually something a little interesting. I tracked the song using this, my D6 inside the kick, and a homemade sub kick that I made with a tiny subwoofer that was broken. But I also made a much bigger sub kick with another subwoofer that was broken. And the results are kind of interesting. Here is the small sub kick. And here is with the big sub kick. There's a lot more thump in that low end. Kind of like that. Now, the reason I actually need to use samples for this session is because we had the double kick set up. And when listening to a lot of the double bass parts, I could spend a lot of time figuring it out, maybe EQ match the kicks to each other, but I think I'm just going to end up replacing the left kick with a sample of the right kick. That way I don't have to fight the phase and the overheads with it. We got our regular snare hits. 57 on top, 57 on bottom, and we have the Bluebird for a condenser top. Now, another reason I need samples for this session is, for some reason, the bottom mic for the snare, when we were tracking, fell down. I need new stands, apparently. But I don't know what happened there, so I want to replace that as well, because there are some parts that are really loud, and then some parts you can just barely see it in there. So I want to fix that up. Also, I didn't have room to put a condenser on the snare, and I wanted to try that out. But because of that double kick setup, I was fighting with space. So after we were done tracking the song, I went ahead and removed the cymbals and the second kick and put in that condenser there. After our normal snare hits, we have rim shots. Then I believe I also had him do a flam here. Yeah. For any of those accented parts that have a flam, triggered flams just sound weird, so I wanted an actual flam sample. Tom 1, that was just a D2 on top. Sometimes when we are done tracking a song and we're done with the mics, I will get one sample at a time. So I would do the snare the way I did this and then add in the condenser. With toms, I sometimes like to do the same thing with having the regular mic. And then now that we have room, I would just mic the bottom of that tom as well. I didn't do that this time because I don't think we need it. With all the symphony and double bass stuff, I'm fighting for a lot of room in this mix. So resonant mic is not exactly what I need for toms in this. But yeah, we have tom 1, tom 2, tom 3. For tom 4, it was a little bit different. For that, I used one of my favorite kick mics. I don't know why I love it for kicks, but I use the D6 for kicks sometimes. I don't know why I like this mic. There's just something about it that I really love. It's a really cheap CAD mic. I think it was like CAD KM112 or something like that. It's super cheap. I think you can buy it for like $6 used, but it's awesome. Anyway, so if I don't use it for the kick, I end up using it for the low floor tom. And that's all the samples I'm working with this time. I didn't do the cymbals outside of the accent hits. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and cut the space in between everything. That way I know where it's separated at. Let's see, how many flams did we do? All right, this is the flam. Okay, so that's everything separated. As you can see, I have all my drums grouped. So we cut everything the same because I already spent time getting everything in phase. I don't want to mess that up. One thing I'm really excited about with the sample kit is that this is my first samples I'm going to be doing with this phone mic. So I'm curious what these sound like, actually. That phone microphone was a really cool effect for rooms. Yeah, that's going to be really cool for some effects stuff. All right, let me turn my groups back on. So the first thing I'm going to be looking at are these two cymbal hits. What I'm going to do is make my track size bigger. All right, that's as big as I can make it. Take a look at the overhead track here, since that's where the cymbals are. So here's where the audio starts. What I'm going to do is hit A to cut it to that starting point and fade it in like that so it starts from 0. Let's give it a listen. Right there sounds like a good ending spot, so I'm going to go ahead and cut to the next spot. Then I'm going to find out where I want to start fading it out. Let's try right here. Hit G to fade out. And with fade outs, I always use an S curve. 9.9 times out of 10, it's always an S curve. They are the most natural sounding fade outs there are. Fade outs sound super weird if you just do a straight line. And with the fade ins, even though it's too small to be really noticeable, I don't do a straight line there either. I have a nice upward curve to try to get the transient in as fast as possible. Fades are all at equal power. Don't care about gain. I want it to sound epic. I'm good with that. Let's take a look at the next one. Go to our overheads. Zoom all the way in. That's where the audio starts, so I'm going to cut there. Do our 4 sample fade. Give it a listen. Right there sounds like a good place to cut it. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's fade it about halfway. Let's see how that sounds. Sounds good to me. So that's the cymbals right there. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off my groups. This is only a cymbal part, so I don't need any of this information right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And actually, you can just go ahead and delete the rest of the information that you're not going to be using for the rest of your tracks. So let me turn off my drum groups here. This is the kick part, so I don't need any of the snare mics. Don't need any of the toms. I am going to keep the overhead and rooms, though. This is another kick part, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that as well. Now, I don't need the kicks for the rest of the session, so I'm just going to go ahead and do all that. Get rid of all that. This is all the snares right here. Then we get to the tom, so I don't need snare for the rest of that. Same with toms, tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, and then in reverse. And then all this extra tom stuff with the snare track. That's going to really clean stuff up. Now, if I was making something like a virtual instrument and you wanted that bleed in there, I would keep that. But I don't have that kind of programming knowledge. I wish I did, because I would love to make a virtual instrument of my own kits, since I know what the sound is that I want, and it would save me a lot of time of setting up triggers all the time. Just make a MIDI drum kit all together. So now that we've cut out all the fat, let's go ahead and listen to our overheads and room again. Sounds much better. Yep, that is going to be very nice. So I don't have a way to speed up this next part. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go to my track name, rename this one. I'll make a tutorial about how I do my organizing later, but I always started off with a double-digit number. That way my computer will recognize it and put everything that I want at the top of the list, and I know everything below that I can just delete. Usually if it's a deleting name, I'm going to name it Z, X, Y, or something like that. And if it's something I'm going to keep, I name it 00. So to find this track later, I'm going to label it 00. Oh, what should we call it? 00 crash. I'm going to go ahead and copy that name. Next. 00 crash. Next. 00 crash. And just like that. In fact, I'm going to get rid of these CMs here. I don't want that. I don't want that in any of my tracks. Those CM names popped up because I committed an insert of all my phase alignment. So now that is labeled with the 00 crash, I know it's going to be a crash sample, and it's going to be up on the top of my list because it's 00. So what I'm going to do, highlight everything and consolidate it. Highlight all this, and consolidate it. All right, now we have our, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have our 8 files for a crash hit. I'm going to go over here where they're all highlighted. Export clips as files. They are WAV files. They are interleaved because I have damn fireworks. Now, because I put my overhead and room samples on a stereo track, I'm going to leave this interleaved. And I want to choose where I want to put them. I have a folder made for sample creation. Go to the session I'm at, and I'm going to make another folder for crash. And then once you have all that set, just hit export. Now, the reason I renamed the tracks over here is because when I consolidate it, it's going to go ahead and label everything in order. So you can see here on the file names, everything is labeled 00, crash, whatever, whatever. And then it's got the 01 here. Then when I tab over to the next one, you can see that the second crash hit is labeled 02. And that is why I rename it here before consolidating. Because otherwise you will have to go in and rename every single one and lining it up later to make sure you got the right hit when you're picking out your samples. That gets pretty infuriating. Now I'm just going to go ahead and remove this. And that is the same process I'm going to use for the rest of the samples. So let me turn my groups back on, drag my kicks over here. Let's zoom into the kicks. So the transient of the kick looks like it starts right about here. I'm looking at the kick in mic. Since the kick in mic is the closest to the source of this hit, that is what I'm looking at. It is where the first bit of audio starts for it. And you can see this little dip right here when it just all of a sudden goes from a normal wave file to that's telling me that that's where the transient is starting, and that's what we want. So cut to there for sample fade. Again, I have my default set, so my fades are these round ones. Cut to the next one, and then let's take a listen to see how long we want this file to be. So I don't want this to be a very long file, so I'm going to make it around there. I'm going to line this up to a grid so I can grid that cut. That seems like a perfect length for me. It might even be too much, but let's put in our fades and see how it sounds now. Let's shorten that fade. All right, let's make that fade longer. All right, I'm not really liking that fade sound, so I'm going to extend that a little bit longer. And let's try one more. That sounds a little bit more natural to me. So that is what I'm going to go with. So for my kicks, I'm going with just an eighth note more than a measure. So that's the process I'm going to be using for all of my shells and all the cutting. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right away. Okay, here's a sample that I don't even want to use, so I'm just not going to have that. And then that was the last kick sample there. So now we have these two kick samples. I'm going to go ahead and line this up to the grid. I know that's how long I want to make it. And have them all be pretty consistent with that. So I'm going to do my fade outs here. And 4 sample fade in. Tabbing over to the next one. Boom, that's it. So I'm only doing these 3 kicks for now because the sub kick mic was switched out on it. I want to name them separately because I'm curious to see the difference on that because I have not gotten to actually test that sub kick out. So let's go ahead and do a renaming. So I'm going to go ahead with 00. That's going to put it at the top of my folder. Now I don't want to start it off with C since Crash already does that. So I'm going to do, let's see, kick sub 1. So 00KS1 is what I'm going to label these ones. Copy that. Boom. Boom. Over to our overheads. All right, now that all that is labeled, I'm going to go ahead and consolidate these. Something else I'm going to do actually, just to make my life a little bit easier, is I'm going to turn my groups back on because I've already cut out all the extra fat of the tracks. All I'm going to do is go modify my groups. I don't want to do my snares right now, and I don't want to do my toms right now. So I'm just going to remove those. That way, when I can click here, get all my tracks from my kicks, and then just hit consolidate. That way I don't have to individually click like I did with the first one. Boom, boom. So let me make sure here. Got all our kick files. Yep, everything over here is highlighted. So let me make sure everything's labeled properly. Yep. 1 1 2 2 3 3. All right. So export files. Everything's the same as last time. Choose our folder. Go back to our root folder here. Create a new one. kick sub 1. And there we go. This process is what I like to do to begin with. As you can see, I'm not adding any effects or anything. These are just raw samples. I'm not normalizing the drum hits. This is so I have the most freedom to work with later. If I end up really liking the mix I do with the cover, then I will probably go back, import all the individual files, load the same processing I used for the cover, render all those plugins on the consolidated files, then put them back into the sampler. That way, I then have a mix-ready sample kit, but I don't really like to do that. I really like the sound of natural samples. All right, so that's the same method I'm going to use for the snare and toms. So I'm just going to go ahead and get those done and jump cut to when I actually make the sample part. All right, so aside from the low floor tom, everything else has 4 samples done. I actually had more samples done of the floor tom, but only 3 of them turned out to be usable. So I'm going to export this last one. Tom 4. Use current folder and export. So everything else, I no longer need any of this, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Save room on the computer. It doesn't matter if I leave this or not. I'm going to go ahead and save the session and no longer need Pro Tools. So with all of our samples cut and consolidated, my trigger method of choice is Slate Trigger 2. So I'm going to go ahead and open the trigger instrument editor. Go ahead and make that bigger. So we go ahead and open up the location of where our samples are saved at. Let's start with kick sub 1. All right, so for the start of this, I'm going to go ahead and make this 4x4. What I want to do is take my kick ins. Okay, so this one's only 3. Forgot. Now, generally, I like to make the loudest hit the first one, but also, if you want to go through and make sure everything sounds good, now's the time to do it. So we got kick 1, kick 2, kick 3. So let's see, which one do I like more? They're all pretty good. I think I like the second one better. And what I'm going to do is copy the second one to be just like that. So I'm going to turn this back to 1. So because I only have these samples, I'm just going to go ahead and leave this at 1 column. And so this is the order it will trigger in. And now all I'm going to do is save instrument, go to the folder where I save all my kits. Yeah, let's see, what do we want to name this kit? I'll just name this butterfly kit. And this is part of the kick sub 1. So we're going to name this KS1 kick in and save it. So the order of the files is number 2, number 1, number 2, number 3. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go to the sub, 2, 1, 2, 3. Now we have our sub kick samples. Boom. Save instrument, KS1, kick, sub. Bam, that's simple. Then we just go down the list. 2, 1, 2, 3 for the overheads. Save instrument, KS1, kick, overhead. Stereo room, 2, 1, 2, 3. KS1, kick, room, stereo. Room mono, 2, 1, 2, 3. I really like that mono room. I don't think I've actually listened to that soloed out on Snare yet. I'm pretty excited for that one. Anyway, save that. Same deal. KS1, kick, room. And then lastly, phone. 2, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's going to be such a cool effect. I'm really excited about that. Save instrument, KS1, kick phone. So after that, I'm going to go ahead and click new instrument. So I've done the kicks now, but before we get to the examples, there is one thing I wanted to note here about the snares. I'm going to go in here and we are going to do the snare tops. But I want to make the snare a multi-sample. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in the snares from all 3 folders. So I want to go through and listen to these. Okay, so I'm actually going to get rid of this and start over. So the flams I want on the bottom. I like the sound of this flam more, so I'm going to make it that. So 2, 1, 2, 3. All right, so let me go back to the regular snare hits in S1. Those I'm going to have in the middle. Want that loud hit as the first one. And you know what? I'm going to make this weak one the third one. So we are going 3, 1, 4, 2. That way it kind of evens itself out. High, medium, low, medium. Then it'll just kind of go in a waveform when it repeats itself. Yeah, that'll sound good. All right, so then after that, I want to go in and have my rim shots be the highest value. I actually don't like this one or this one. All right, so this one I really like. I'm going to make that number 1. And I'm going to make this one last. All right, so I think that's how we're going to have it set up. So let me put this back to 3. And I want the cutoff or the trade-off to be 100 for there and 50 for there. So with this, as long as it's between 50 and 100, it will be a regular snare hit. And when the MIDI is over 100, it will be a rim shot. So that is how I will be programming MIDI for it if I use this as a regular instrument. Now, when I take Massey DRT, it creates the MIDI velocity for me itself. Now I will be manually adjusting the MIDI to make sure it stays where it needs to. But I want the dynamics of it to stay the same. So I'm just going to go through that and make sure everything's all right. And then if it's below 50, it will be the accented flams. So you get to the end of a run and you want to do a flam break instead of programming 2 snare hits and hearing that weird trigger sound. you'll just hear an actual flam. That's the way I prefer it. It's less programming and it sounds more natural because it is natural. So anyway, go ahead and save this. Create a new folder, snare. And this one is just going to be snare top. Then we just go through the 3 folders and do the same thing we did with the other ones. All right, now to the examples. All right, so we are back in the sample session, and I went ahead and created some MIDI drums, just some nonsense stuff to test out all the samples. I got the velocity showing here, so you can see with the kick track right here. I got the velocity set to a regular kick level there. And for the slower parts, I went ahead and used the more powerful kick drum sample since we have the above 100 being the hardest and below 100 being the softest. And during the double kick runs here, I have it alternating between the hard and soft hits to give a little bit more variety. All right, and for the snare hits, we have the normal snare hits for the most of it. This is all like 98, I think, is what I put it at. Then we have the slow parts using rim shots. And then a couple accent parts doing the flams, which is below 50. Toms, I just left it all one velocity. It didn't matter since they were all the same. I just turned off the dynamics for it so it would be as loud as it normally would be. And for most of the cymbals, I'm using Superior Drummer since I didn't want to spend time doing any cymbal samples this time around. So all I got for that is a little bit of ride and hi-hat. I did, however, decide, just because I figured I'd test out those crash hits I did. So here during the slow section, I have 2 hits of one of them. And then the rest, I just put in the other one. I don't remember what it was. I believe the slow hits here are the crash hits, and the double bass section here I have China. I think that's what the sample order was. And as far as processing goes, I just have the MIDI tracks. They are going into the trigger. Got it from my butterfly kit. So this is what the kick looks like. Got the kick in, kick sub. I went with the KS2 kick because that is the one I think I'm going to be using the most. I really like the sub kick. It's got a nice bit of oomph to it. Snare, we got the 3 main ones. This condenser track I'm not really liking too much, only because I didn't have a lot of time, so I just threw the gain on whatever level. And of course, that gain level was too much, so it became a bit distorted. However, I'm kind of liking the effect it's adding to the snare. It's just dirty and making the snare get a little bit more grit. It's kind of like putting a saturator on your snare. So I think I'm going to like that sample, actually. Of course, you don't want a dry snare. Got the room tracks going on there. Toms, just actually, I'm going to turn the room down a little bit. Turn down the tom rooms by 5, just as a general number. Haven't listened to it yet. So, all right, let's try that. The only other thing I have going on is I bust it like I would a normal drum kit. So everything is going to the drum bus, and then the shells are going to the drum compressor, and then all that is going to my mix bus. There I just threw on ozone limiter, and then I have L1 on my master bus just to catch any peaks that don't get caught with ozone. I'm not counting that as processing though, because that is something I add in pretty much every session I work on. So aside from that, it's all just raw drum. It's all just the raw drum samples that we got from the session. No EQ has been added to any of the samples at any point in the stage. It's just record and cut. So let's give this a listen. Yeah, those sound like decent samples to me. I mean, they would sound a lot better if they were mixed, but again, I like to do that after triggering everything. If I want to, I'll come back and add mixing to the samples and then go through the whole process of sampling it in the Slate trigger editor. But as it is, I like that. That works exactly how I need it for this session. And that is fine for now. And that's how I create samples. So one of the things I wanted to do is take a look at the phone samples we made. And let's take a look here. So I'm just going to set that up and solo them all. And now I want to listen to that again because I think for like a little break section or maybe even a dirty enhancer for regular drums, I think it would sound really cool, but I don't know. Let's test it out. It's interesting. I don't know if I really like that for a sample, but I think I can find a use for that. Now, if you stuck around and watched this whole video, here's my gift to you. I will give you the direct. So if you've stuck around until the end of this video, here's my gift to you. I'm going to go ahead and leave a download in the description below. There's going to be a link where I will put in the direct samples. So the direct toms, the snare, I will put all 3 snares in there, and I will put both the kicks and the sub kicks in there. If you use them and create something cool with it, let me know. For the rest of it, the room samples, the phone samples, and all of that, I will probably throw that on my website when it's finished. I still don't know when that's going to be. And if there's demand for it, I will eventually create one-shots of everything. But I like multi-samples, so that's kind of what I use for now, even though one-shots would be easier to do. But that's where I stand right now. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, subscribe. You know it. See you later.